Dom? Jumbo? This man knows how to respond to Kiswahili. I told you that you spoke Kiswahili and you could translate for me today. Are you with me? I told you that you knew Swahili, so I'm here to prove it. And there is reward for those who give the correct answer. Who can tell me which animal I am saying in Kiswahili? I'm going to say a name of an animal in Kiswahili. The first one to stand and give me the correct answer gets a prize. Are you ready? Yeah. Are you on the edge of your seat like Bible quizzing? What animal is named Simba? Lion. Very good. Who can translate for me this phrase? Who can translate for me this phrase? Hakuna Matata. I saw it back, way back. No worries. No problem. Hakuna Matata. You see, everything you did not understand in the Lion King movie is Swahili, our language. A Lion King movie I wish you had had more faith. I am happy that our church has turned 100 years old. But even though we are old, our mission is the same. Here in America, we play a game called darts. In Africa, we play spears. But without the target, there's no game. Our mission in the Church of the Nazarene is our target. And our mission is 7 short words. To make Christ-like disciples in the nations. In 28th chapter of Matthew, Jesus gave us a command. Go and make disciples. There's no option. It's not, oh, if I have time. Or if I have a gift. Jesus said to you and to me, go and make disciples. In the first chapter of Acts, before Jesus ascended into heaven, he said, you will be my witnesses. No option. A command. And before, while Paul was coming down the road to Damascus, he met Jesus Christ for the first time. And he lost his seeing, his eyes. They led him into the city. Someone came and opened his eyes. And he began immediately to tell people about the man that he met on the road. And later on in Paul's life, Jesus came beside him and said, you will witness of me in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts. And at that time the uttermost parts was Rome.
And that is where Paul ended his life. Telling the people of Rome about a man that he met. Who changed his life completely. That is our mission. To go and make disciples. The Church of the Nazarene in 1985 wanted to enter 5 new countries. One of those was the country of Kenya. And so they sent Melody and I and our family to Kenya to plant churches. And so we arrived in the capital city of Nairobi. And we were sent over to the town of Kisumu. It is on the shores of Lake Victoria.
It's Victoria,
the second largest freshwater lake in the world. Out of that lake come 300-pound Nile perch.
It starts in 300 pounds.
It is out of that lake where many people get their food. And we worked all along the lake area. We lived there for 10 years. And during that 10 years, God helped Kenyans and me to plant 120 churches.
That
is one church every month for 10 straight years. And it is God who did it. 8 years into that 10 years. We knew our work had finished there. For there were churches. There were churches. And there were pastors. And we had district advisory boards. And we had district superintendents. And so we asked our leadership, can we go over to Uganda? To bring the Church of the Nazarene there. And they allowed us to do so. We have been going across from Kenya to Uganda off and on during those years. We went over for the first time to teach for 2 weeks. And after those 2 weeks of teaching about 40-50 people, one of the young men came up to me. His name was William. And he said, can you help me? I said, how would you like me to help you? He said, could you help us to buy 10 hoes? 10 digging instruments, 10 hoes. And I said, what do you need 10 hoes for? You're only one man. He said, there's 10 of us that want to do evangelism. I said, I know about planting the seed of the gospel, but you don't plant it in the ground with a hoe. He said, no, I know that, but we want to plant seeds so we can grow a crop and then go out like Paul. We don't want to be a burden on the people when we come to tell them. So we bought the hoes. And they began to dig in that land that they had. And they planted maize, corn. And it grew and they harvested it. And they put it into the sacks. And they went out to evangelize. And they carried their food with them. When I was down there another time, after we'd been home on furlough, I arrived immediately into Uganda and I got a telephone call. I was supposed to go down there because they were having a big youth rally. And because I was one of the district superintendents, I had to be there.
superintendent
because our district's team was playing in the finals.
It's the district team program
We were playing football.
It's not football
Not American football that you play with your hands.
American football
but football you play with your feet. Otherwise known as soccer. And so I went down and we had a good rally. And then we came to the football field. Now you have to understand we were in the finals. But it's not really that big. Because there's only 2 districts. And that district and our district were playing one another. And so I stood at the midfield line. And Reverend Nathan was the other DS standing with me. And the first half was tough. But we ended up tied halfway through the game. Our defenses were good. It was 0-0. I went over to our team while they were resting. I said, "You're doing good." He says, "Dan, we're tired. And look at our feet. They weren't looking good." See, Reverend Menya's team had cleats, football boots to wear. My team played with bare feet. The second half did not go well. Reverend Nathan's team started shooting the goals, one after the other after the other. And they beat us quite soundly. After the game, we had fellowship and we had refreshment. And then the same young man, William, came up to me and said, "Reverend Dan, I have something to tell you." I said, "Oh, what is that?" He said, "Well, we can't stand here under the sun. We live on the equator. Let's go stand under the tree." I said, "Okay." So he began to tell me a bit about his family and about the church. You see, in Africa, relationships are very important. You don't just say hello and leave. You share about your family. You share about your work. And so after doing that, he said, I need to tell you something. I said, "What is it?" He said, "I need to leave the Rutete Church of the Nazarene." I was surprised. And my heart hurt. I couldn't believe that he would want to leave this great church. It was the largest Church of the Nazarene by attendance in East Africa for the Church of the Nazarene. They were running 500 people every Sunday. And I said, "William, I don't know what to say to you. But I will pray with you about this." And he said, "Thank you." And we finished the youth rally and we went home. We are now living in the town of Jinja. It is also along the shores of Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is the second largest freshwater lake in the world. The largest one is Lake Superior. Lake Victoria allows the longest river in the world to begin. That is the Nile River. The Nile is where Moses was put into a basket and put into the water. Moses was put into a basket. And I also have been put into a basket and put into that same river. And I know that Moses cried. I also cried. But Moses probably cried because he was hungry or he was wet. But me, I cried because I was having joy of doing the whitewater rafting down the Nile River. So I went back to Jinja and I continued the work we were doing. Uganda is about the size of the state of Oregon. We were there for several months until one night as I went to bed. I could not sleep. And I laid there and I still could not go to sleep. So I thought maybe I can talk with God a bit. So I began to thank God for helping us here in the country of Uganda. I thanked Him for helping us to get 3 districts for the Church of the Nazarene started. But we wanted to go up to the northwest part of Uganda to start a new district. But I didn't know how to do it. And so I started talking with God about it. How are we going to do it, God? We don't have anybody up there. We don't have anybody to send up there. How are we going to do it, God? And He whispered, what about William? And I said, no way, not William. I know he's got some kind of problem. He has to leave Rotate Church. I don't want to take that problem and put it up here. So I continued to talk with God and ask Him, how are we going to do this and who are we going to use and when are we going to start? And again God said, what about William? And I said, are you sure? Because I was not sure. And God did not speak anymore. And I knew He had chosen William. So I fell asleep. When I woke the next morning, I got on the phone and called William. We set up a time the next week for me to come down and we would talk. So when I got down there, we again talked about our families and our work and what was happening. And finally I said, William, I've come to ask you something, but before I do, I have a question for you. I said, William, why do you want to leave Rotate Church? What's the problem? He said, what? I don't want to leave. I said, what? I thought after the football match you told me you wanted to leave. He said, I said, what? I thought when we talked you said you wanted to leave. He said, no, I didn't say that. I said, what did you say? He said, I said I needed to leave. I said, what's the difference between want to leave and need to leave? He said, it's a big difference. I don't want to leave, but I need to leave. I said, okay, what's the problem? Why do you need to leave? He said, there's no problem. I said, what? Are you having a problem with your people? He said, no, they love me. Are you having a problem with your church board? He said, no. He said, haven't you been looking at our reports we've been sending out in? We're growing all the time. I said, okay, William, just tell me, why do you need to leave?
Asala kati net bigatsin. Asala William Zian Ron aswa ikaw aswa sana tool tiap isim ni ko kati.
He said it's very simple. God has told me my work is finished, but I don't know where I'm supposed to go. And I said, no problem. He says, no. And I said, William, you've made my heart feel good today. Now, I have good news for you. I know where God wants you to go. He said, you do? I said, yes, I've come to ask you and your wife Irene if you'd be willing to travel up to Masindi, a new town, and start a new work. And he said, oh, Dan, that's so far away. It's about 7 hours by car. But he's used to a bicycle or a motorcycle. And I said, I don't want an answer today. Go home and talk to your wife. And pray. Ask God what He wants. When you have the answer, give me a call. And so we part. Some weeks go by, he calls us, Dan, would it be alright if we go and look first? I said, sure, no problem. In fact, I'm going up there. Why don't we meet in the capital city, Kampala? We'll go together. So William and I came up to Kampala, we came and we met, we went together to Masindi. When we arrived, we all went different ways. We wanted to talk to as many people as we could. We wanted to find out how many churches there were. And how this small town was like. We came back together and we sat down to have a meal. And the waitress came and asked what would we like to drink. And because Uganda used to be a British protectorate, we drink a lot of hot tea. We drink hot tea at 8 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, at 12 o'clock, at 4 o'clock, at 6 o'clock, and at dinner, somewhere between 8 and 10 o'clock. We drink hot tea the whole day. And so she went and she brought our hot tea. And I saw Irene as she looked at the tea. She looked at the tea bag. And she started to tear it open. And we stopped her. For she was from the rural, she only knew of loose leaf tea. And so we showed her how to make tea with a tea bag. You fill it 2/3 of the way full with hot water. You put the tea bag in. You add 2 heaping teaspoons of sugar. You put the rest of it with milk. You stir it up. And you got a good cup of tea. And then I turned to Irene. I said, Irene, what do you think about Masindi? She said, oh, Dan, it's so big. And it's just a small little town. I said, what do you think about coming up here? She says, Dan, my friends aren't here. My relatives are not here. And then our food came, so we began to eat. When we finished the food, she turned to William
and
said, William, maybe we should come. Dan and Melody, they come all the way from America. They come and stay for 4 years. They get to go back on the 5th year to see their friends, family, and churches. And I said, I don't want an answer today. For if it is because you want to come, you won't stay. It has to be God's call. So I want you to go home and continue to pray until God gives you an answer. So we went back home. About a month went by. And William calls me on the phone. Dan, we've got the answer. I said, what is it? We are ready. God has told us to go to Masindi. I said, great. I said, when should we come? He gave me the date, so we drove down with our Mitsubishi Pajero. It's like your Mitsubishi Montero here, it's an SUV. And we loaded all their belongings inside and up on top of our vehicle. We put their 3 children, William and I, Melody and I, in the vehicle. And we drove up to Masindi. It took us less than 30 minutes to offload and have the house that we had rented set up. No U-Haul trailer or rider truck. But they didn't have very much. They did not have very much. We prayed with them. We promised we would continue to pray for them. And we went back to Ginger. Weeks went by and he finally called. Says, Dan, I was out preaching, got some people saved, and now we're having a Bible study. I said, great, that's good, keep it up. More weeks went by, again he calls. Then we're growing and we moved from that house to another house. Great, we're praying for you. Over and over he kept telling me they were growing, but he kept telling me they were moving, and I'm going, why are they moving? Finally I decided we need to drive up there. I heard he was living in a house that was being rented by a doctor. So when I reached, I started asking people, do you know a house that's owned by a doctor and he's renting it out? They said, yes, down this dirt road here, go this way. I said, okay. And as we drove, we stopped to talk with people along the way. Do you know this house? And they said, yes, it's there, it's there. Finally, someone said, it's the house directly opposite the borehole. A borehole is either a hand dug or a drilled hole that you get your water out of with a hand pump on top. So we drove to the borehole and we parked our vehicle. We went across the road and went to the house. Knocked on the door. William opened the door. He said, hey, how did you find me here? And I said, William, I'm a missionary. I can do these kind of things. He laughed at me and let us come in. We sat down and began to share what was going on. He had said he went across the road to a school. And they were allowing him to use the largest classroom they had there for a church. I said, that's great. He said, it was great. But we can't fit everybody in anymore. I said, well, do you know of any land that's for sale? He reached in his pocket and pulled out a paper with a list of lands. He knew me too well. I said, let's go look at them. So we went and looked at one after the other. And he saved the best one for last. It was a big land. It was along a main road. I said, where's the owner? So we went and met the owner. And we began to negotiate the price of buying the land. We negotiated until the man was very happy. And I was somewhat happy. And we bought the land. I said, William, now you have your church land. Immediately his church people went out and started cutting trees down. And started to put them in the ground in a rectangle. Then they put more poles going up. And they got grass and started putting it on the roof. Then they got the small branches and started weaving them in and out of the poles, leaving a place for a door and some windows. Then they got mud and started packing the mud all the way around for walls. And when that work is done, the men are finished. They have done the work they're supposed to do. Now it's the women's job. Women are the ones who have just the right decorative eye on how it's supposed to be finished. They are the ones who do the plastering of the building. And so the women go out and gather all the manure that they can find. And they bring it in. Big mound of manure. And they add some water in. They start to mix it up. And then all the women gather around and start grabbing it and throwing it against the wall. Inside and outside of the church. Then they go and they smooth it so nicely. And I'm so thankful that God has given the women the gift of plastering. But for me, who grew up on a dairy farm, there's nothing better than a freshly plastered church. But when it dries, when the rains come, the rain just goes away. It doesn't ruin the walls. And William began to fill the church. People started getting saved. Months later, I again went up on a Sunday morning this time. And when I got there, I saw people standing on the outside looking through the door and looking through the windows. They couldn't get in that church. And afterwards I said, William, you've got a problem. What are you going to do? He says, Dan, we need a permanent church. I said, are your people ready for a permanent church? He said, yes. I said, is the soil good for making bricks? He said, yes, we have clay in the soil. And they started to make 20, 30, 40,000 bricks. You make the soil muddy and you pack it into a form, you flip the form out and let it dry. And then you start stacking these up like a pyramid. But you leave a bottom part open like a fireplace. And then around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you start lighting that wood. And you start putting the big pieces in there. And you watch as the heat comes through the bricks. And when it gets to be about 4 or 5 feet from the top, they close that fireplace out and keep the heat inside. They plaster it with mud. And they leave it for 2 weeks. And then they come back and they peel the mud off. And they have nice fired bricks ready to build a church. We put the pegs in the ground with twine to show where we needed to dig the foundations. And I had gone up after they'd been digging for some days. And I saw Pastor William's wife Irene over in the corner. She's a short lady, so she was about up to here in the foundation. And I said, Irene, what are you doing? She turned around, and sweat was coming off of her face. Dirt was on her face, and she was swinging her hoe, digging the foundation. She said, Dad, we've got to get this going. We've got to get our church built. So we finished that and we poured the foundation. We came up with the stem wall of bricks and poured the slab of concrete for the floor. We started putting our walls up. When I got a call from a young lady named Angela. She'd come to Uganda with a youth and mission team some years before. She had married a young man who was called into the ministry as a pastor. And they were living in Boston, Massachusetts. And she says, Dan, I'm married, we have a small church, I think it'll grow if we have a working witness team. Do you have a project for us? I do. When can you come? So they made the arrangements. We picked them up at the airport. I love working witness teams. But when this team came out of the airport, I got scared. For as I looked at them, I saw that they were 18 to 24 years of age. I knew that they could text message and they could use a computer. But did they know what a hammer, a saw, or a trowel was? I wasn't sure. But we got in the vans and we drove up to Masindi. When we arrived there, we greeted one another. Finally, I said, it's time to go to work. And so we finished putting up the walls. We were building the trusses that hold the roof. We got those standing up. Then we started putting the tin roof, the iron sheets on. They're 39 inches wide and 10 feet long. We started pushing them up there and I started to nail them. I think they were hitting this thumbnail more than they were the roofing nail. But they were moving slowly but surely. But they did not finish. They came down, we had a meal together and we prayed together. We took the team back to the airport. We turned around and went back up to Masindi. I said, William, we got to get this roof finished. He said, how are we going to do it? I said, we are going to do it. Everybody grab the nail aprons, the leather that holds the nails and the hammer. So they got them on and they put their nails in the pockets. They went up the ladder and started pushing more iron sheets. They kept nailing until finally it was over. And they came down. We came inside the church. We just stood there. And I remember William standing beside me. And he said, isn't God good? Nothing about how hard they'd worked. Nothing about sacrifice. Only, isn't God good? I said, he is, William, he is. And now you must fill this big church. I was down in Ginger when he called me again some months later. He told me how the Masindi Grace Church of the Nazarene was doing. And he wanted me to come up and worship with him again. I said, William, there are many other churches I need to visit. I can't come back to Grace Church. He said, no, not Grace Church, the other church. I said, what other church? Oh, we started another church 20 miles away. And I said, who gave you authority to start a new church? He said, somebody came and asked me to go and preach, so I preached. Some people got saved. And they wanted Bible study. What am I supposed to do then? I guess start another church. And then he went the other way and started another church. And at the beginning of this year, your North Vernon, Indiana church came across and helped us finish that church. Then William asked me, Dan, do you have the Jesus film? I said, yes, I have it on a 16mm. A 16mm film. But I don't have a projector free to give to you to use. He said, no problem, I'll get one. So I brought the film up to him. He said he had a friend who gave him an 18mm projector. I said, will this 16mm film fit on an 18mm projector? 16mm film, 18mm projector. He said, it must. I said, I'm not so sure, but let's try. We put it on and it worked. So his wife sewed together a bunch of bed sheets for a screen. Someone else gave him a generator and speakers. And out he went to show the Jesus film. He went up to the sugarcane area. And he showed the Jesus film there. But because there's a big Muslim area up there, they chased him away. But he kept telling people about Jesus. And I thought, how can this young man be doing this? He grew up in a non-Christian home.
Christian family At
school, one of the students told him about Jesus and he accepted him as his Savior. And when he came home, he told his father. His father and his aunt were witch doctors. His father looked at William and said, William, I don't need you in this house anymore. Go. So William packed his small canvas bag. He went to a town called Rakai. Rakai is where the world first found the HIV/AIDS virus. And he began to preach and teach the Bible. But some people there didn't want him there. And so when there was a theft, they pointed their finger at William. So the police came and arrested William. And then they went out to find out what had happened. Everybody they talked to who knew William said it can't be William. He's a Christian. He reads his Bible all the time. He's a preacher. When we don't have food, he shares the little he has with us. Time after time after time, they heard the story. Until the police said it can't be him, and they released him. He left Rakai and went back home, hoping his father would allow him to come back. He would not, so he went off to another area. He started another church, had them build a building. When the people of Rutete said, William, come home, we need to hear what you're preaching. And so he arranged that church with a pastor and everything that they would need, and he came home. And he started the Rutete church that grew to be the largest church. And when he left Rutete to go to Masindi, he left the young man who was wearing the red coat. To be the pastor. There had been two young men who wanted to be the pastor. They wanted to stand in front of all the people and have them listen to him. But the church people said no. We want John Hampson as our pastor. William had discipled John Hampson. John Hampson was in charge of the Sunday school. During the week he would call on everybody who came to Sunday school. Not just his family, not just his Sunday school class, but everybody in church he would call up. For he knew how important Sunday school was. Because Sunday school is where you disciple.
Sunday school
where you help people to mature in Christ. And so I went to John Hampson. I said, the church at Rutete wants you to be their pastor. He said, I know, but I can't. I said, why? He said, well, you know that when I try to talk, sometimes I stutter. I said, John Hampson, there's a man in the Old Testament named Moses.
John Hampson,
who also had a problem with his speech. He said, Dan, don't tell me about Moses, please. I said, I only have 2 questions for you, John Hampson. Has God asked you to be the pastor? And what is your answer? He looked down at the ground. And he said, yes. Yes. And he became the pastor of this 500-person church. The funny thing is that when John Hampson stands to preach, he hardly stutters at all. But when you talk to him on the phone, you just want to get him to talk. Come on, say it, say it. God blesses those who are faithful to Him. And now Rutete Church is running 700 people in the church. Sometimes churches grow because of the pastor and his personality. But Rutete Church and the churches that William plants are growing because of discipleship. Now earlier, Hal said that the church in America has grown cold. And as I look at the statistics, I see that the growth is little. And sometimes I wonder why. We have freedom here. And then I wonder, are we doing what we were commanded to do? I know some churches say, well, that's why we hired the pastor. He's the one that does that. The problem is I grew up on a farm. It's not the shepherd who produces sheep. It's the sheep who produce sheep. The shepherd takes care of all the sheep. But if we are not out there telling people about Jesus, we are not doing what Jesus commanded us to do. We go into the grocery store and we pay the same person week after week for our groceries. And we don't say a word about Jesus. We go to school and we don't tell our classmates about Jesus. We go to work and we don't tell those around us that there's a Jesus that can bring salvation to them. We are not doing what we need to be doing. In fact, we don't even care. I was just listening to the radio this morning. And I laughed. Someone talked about the church being like Little Bo Peep.
What's a little Bo?
Let me explain and then you'll get it. Little Bo Peep lost her sheep and didn't know where to find them. Leave them alone, they'll come home, wagging their tail behind them. It means that we aren't worried about them. They'll take care of themselves.
Thusim radio kang ai rakshin mi chu yang ti tile chu kan hi shop sat mi chu hi ko ran church pol chu yang na kan si tile tu khal tu atu lo dia kan jiang mana poi chu lo te tu pol chan ma te na ki le ding si an tu lo fa fa ha jan ki chan ne ki sa ding si tian ti.
We have a responsibility.
Kan man chon lo kan nei si.
When we arrived home, I had a problem with my laptop lid of my computer. And I saw this computer store. It was called Dr. PC. The name brought me into the store. I met a young lady from Guatemala who owned the store. And the technician was from Fiji. And I went right at home. And I said, I have this problem. And they started to take it apart. And they said, oh, it's the hinge, it's broken. I said, where's your jar of parts? Where is your container of spare parts? They said, Dan, this is America. You have to buy the whole thing. I said, no way. And she got on the phone and called a friend who was able to get the small part. She said it would come the next day. I went in and I gave the computer and they started to put that part in. She said, Dan, I know it's like in Africa, but you need to fill out this paper for me. Give me your name, where you're living, how you're going to pay for this. So I filled it out and I gave it to her. She looked at it and said, what does this mean? It was Reverend Daniel Anderson. I said, oh, that means like you're from Guatemala. It's like I'm a priest in your church. Oh, I see. My mother was a Catholic. My father was atheist. I tried to figure out what I was going to do and I couldn't, so I just said, She said, I've always felt like I was missing something. And I said, can I tell you what it is you're missing? And I saw she was wearing a small necklace with a cross. I said, what does this mean to you? I was going to tell you it meant nothing. But my mom taught me, and it does mean something. And I said, it means a lot to me. And I took the opportunity to try and meet someone who's in trouble eternally. Are we making disciples in the nations? Are we talking to our neighbors and our friends? Is our church growing? I know it is in Africa. I know it is in South America. What about your neighborhood? What about your local church? Are you doing what God has commanded you to do? to make Christ-like disciples in the nations. If we will do this, God will bless us. William got the call to come home. And when he reached there, he found his father on the bed sick. And his witch doctor father said, William, tell me about this Jesus. And he told his father. And his father accepted Jesus Christ. 2 weeks later, his father passed away. And William was blessed. He went away to tell others. And God answered his prayer for his father. And now there's a new Church of the Nazarene on a land given by his father. We are 100 years old. And we can only become 200 years old if we continue to grow and do what we're called to do. Thank you for praying for missionaries. Thank you for going and visiting. Thank you for giving. Thank you for sending Melody and I to Uganda. For as we go for you. We go because Christ told the Church of the Nazarene to make Christ-like disciples. May God bless you as you fulfill His command.